that a minute to kick in. Okay, welcome to the webinar this morning hosted by us, the Housing Ombudsman Service. Thank you all for joining. My name is Victoria King. I'm one of the Sector Learning and Development Leads here at the Housing Ombudsman Service. And in this webinar, we will hear from Zoe Miller, our Insight and Systemic Manager, and Chris Harrison, one of our Insight and Systemic Leads here at the Housing Ombudsman Service. Zoe and Chris are going to be talking about the latest Housing Ombudsman Service Spotlight Report, Repairing Trust, which was released in May 2025. The report highlights the need to modernise maintenance operations and end poor practices, so things like denying access to necessary repairs. Zoe and Chris are going to talk about this in a lot more detail, but trust is really essential between landlords, residents and contractors. And our investigation reveals that there are shared values of respect, empathy, accurate information, safety and mutual trust. And in this webinar, we're going to talk about our investigation, the key findings and our recommendations. We hope there's going to be enough time to answer some questions about the report, so please feel free to add these to the chat as Zoe and Chris are speaking. Could we just keep the questions to questions about the report? And any questions that we can't answer during the session today, we'll take away and try and answer and come back to you guys after the session. As I've mentioned, this recording will be put onto the Housing Ombudsman Service website and also onto the Centre for Learning Landlord Hub, where there'll be a transcript. So if you want to share it with colleagues afterwards, please feel free to. So yeah, if you could just stay on mute, that'd be amazing. And as I mentioned, Zoe and Chris are going to be leading the session. So Zoe and Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Victoria. And so I'm just going to start with a brief recap on what a spotlight report is and what we mean by that in this presentation. So our spotlight reports are designed to focus on an area of service provision where we see a high level of failure across our membership. And the reports involve extensive research, which we will cover, and field work, and to produce a comprehensive thematic report. And crucially, they set out learning and recommendations for landlords as well as government and policymakers to hopefully avoid further complaints or service failure, and also let residents know more about their rights. In terms of why we chose repairs and maintenance as a topic, we did our first ever Spotlight report back in March 2019, Room for Improvement, which was also about repairs. And I think it's safe to say that an awful lot has happened since then. So the pandemic, the building safety regulations, the Grenfell inquiry report, to name just a few things. And also, it's a dominant theme in our casework, and as highlighted in the report, we've seen over 400% increase in the amount of repairs and maintenance findings that we're making. And so I've touched briefly on our approach to spotlight reports. In terms of this report specifically, we decided very early on that we really wanted, more than ever, a range of perspectives that we wouldn't normally just be able to establish from our casework or our call from evidence. And so this is a really collaborative piece of work where we've worked with a number of different agencies. We didn't want it to just be an inward looking report into our casework. And it was really important to us that we focused on what is working well and not just produce a report about learning from maladministration. We already have reports that cover that, so that's not the purpose of these reports. We reviewed over 300 of our cases. We met with key stakeholders such as CIH, NHF and TPAS, who facilitated various roundtable events for us to capture the contractor and procurement agency's perspective. We opened our call for evidence to elected representatives for the first time, and we carried out field work. So that involved meeting with a mixture of landlords from Newcastle down to Cornwall, because we really wanted that broad geographical spread. And we also met with academics, so primarily the University of Birmingham, and we drew upon their research about home as an emotional place, which we will come on to. And I'm now going to hand you over to Chris, who's going to talk us through the call for evidence analysis.
Yeah, so we, for all of these spotlight reports, we put out a call for evidence to the sector. So residents, landlords usually. This time we opened it up to operatives, people who work for contractors or direct labour organisations, and as Zoe said, elected representatives. We had a record number of responses to this particular call for evidence. We had over 3,000, it was a lot of work to go through. For context, our previous Spotlight report, the Relationship of Equals report, which was itself a record breaker in terms of call for evidence, had about half as many responses. So we really had a huge evidence base to start with, which was terrific. So what did it tell us? Well, from the resident perspective, it told us that poor communication is a key driver, but also, you know, there's some other things there as well. The headline for me was that 4 out of 5 resident respondents rated their provider as being poor or very poor at keeping them informed about the progress of a repair. Now we'll come on to that a bit later, but that was a pretty stark outline. What's that, Victoria? Sorry.
Oh, we can't see the slides, Chris. I think you might need to reshare.
I will reshare. Sorry about that, folks.
Yeah, brilliant. We can
the
see those now.
Oh.
Lovely, thank you.
Told me that 15 minutes ago. Never mind, Wally. Sorry, everybody. How professional. Anyway, yes, as I say, 4 out of 5 rated their landlords poor, very poor, keeping them informed about the progress of repairs and maintenance requests. We also found more than half of residents rated their landlords as very poor, keeping them informed about changes to appointments, which obviously happens. So that line of communication is the thing that frustrates residents the most from what we saw there. The other thing that struck us in this work was the quality of repair work. So about 3 in 5 residents rated the quality of work that they'd experienced as poor or very poor. We had a bunch of written responses from residents as well. So we invited residents who you know felt they wanted to say something else that our survey didn't ask them, and we received a few dozen of those, and those elaborated on that point. Many of them were sort of noting that there's a lack of sort of quality assurance activity, so post inspections and so on. But those written responses also went into concerns about the perceived lack of proactive maintenance, which ultimately leads to disrepair and damage to property and belongings, which is caused sometimes during repair works. There were some regional variations. I haven't put anything on the slides about that, but there were some interesting bits. Londoners are generally less satisfied. Make of that what you will. The interesting regional point, I don't know whether this rings true to anybody, but unreasonable or threatening behaviour seemed to be reported as more of an issue in the Midlands. From residents, that's by unreasonable behaviour from residents, by the way. That's another thing. Similar to the Relationship of Equals report, the call for evidence there, about 40% of residents told us that they were disabled, that they were living with a condition that affected their daily lives. Only about 20% of them felt their landlord was making appropriate, reasonable adjustments. Our previous report went into that in a little bit more, but in the context of this report, that was geared towards access and the information about reasonable adjustments being appropriately shared with the human beings who are visiting the property. Right, moving on. Some stats there on the operational landscape. So more than half of the landlords who responded say they outsourced some or all of their repairs. Not everybody had a code of conduct for their operatives, which we'll come on to again a bit later. The complaint handling arrangements I found was interesting from experience, from casework experience. I thought that would be a lot higher. I thought a lot more. I feel like I've seen a lot more stage 1 responses coming from contractors, but only 1 in 5 give any complaint handling responsibility to their contractors. Other things from landlords and operatives there. Unsurprisingly, gaining access to properties is the biggest barrier to service delivery. Regionally, there was a shortage, a particularly pronounced shortage of available tradespersons in the southwest of England, which we thought was interesting. And from our conversations with those landlords, it appears the rural nature of the region and the population density down there is behind that, and some of the other challenges that go on there. There was also a problem with shortage of tradespersons in the northeast as well. I don't really know what was behind that, but we'll talk to some more landlords about that at some point, I'm sure. Yes, that's that. So elected representatives, this was interesting. We've never done this before. We didn't time it particularly well, admittedly. Our call for evidence went out just about the time that a general election was called. So we didn't have a great deal of response from members of Parliament. We did have a couple, but not as many as we'd hoped for. But we did hear from hundreds of elected representatives, so local councillors in the main. And they report, again, unsurprisingly, most of the complaints that they see from their constituents are about the time it takes to get work done, closely followed by damp and mould. The thing that was striking about those responses, though, is that elected reps sort of really do see the detriment to resident health and well-being that is caused by some of these delays, or the delays contribute to. Nearly every response we got back from an elected rep referred to that, and the language that they used was quite emotive in a lot of cases. Okay, back to you, Zoe.
Thanks, Chris. So after the review of the casework, all that fantastic call for evidence analysis and field work, it became clear to us that the report should be centred on the theme of trust. So repairing trust was decided as a title quite early on in the process. And as Victoria said, we've looked at this from the perspective of contractors, landlords and residents, and the interplay between those three parties. And we then have broken that down into three main areas. So building empathic relationships and understanding, blame and accountability, and safety, risk and complaint management. So in terms of building those relationships and understanding, one of the key areas from our casework and discussions, roundtable events, was around access, the issue of no access. And our report looks at this both in terms of practical and emotional reasons why a resident may refuse access or may not be at home to enable the appointment to take place. So by practical, we mean that there might be a lack of reminder, operatives might be sent to jobs without being given any ID or job references, which then means that a resident may not feel inclined to allow them into the property. Parking permits came up quite a lot as well from a contractor perspective, saying about sometimes having to leave a job because they just can't park. And then the emotional aspect, and this ties in with the Home as an Emotional Place research. So this is more about the fear of judgment, feelings of shame, residents not trusting what the visit is for. So, for example, if a resident is in arrears, they may feel that the contractor or operative is there about that, or that it will come up in conversation. We also found out about concerns about residents might have about any costs that may be incurred as a result of the visit. So, for example, having to put the heating on. And we saw some really positive examples of how this is being managed. So landlords offering heating vouchers before an appointment, some landlords having a resident liaison service. One landlord told us about what they called their Invisible Need campaign, so promoting the importance of such visits and safety checks. Other landlords told us about combining safety checks with other works to really minimise the number of visits and that intrusion that's associated with that. And we do stress in the report that there will always be cases where no matter what approach is adopted, access won't be granted for whatever reason. But we really stress the point that that doesn't negate the need for that human-centric approach and looking at access in both in terms of the practical and the emotional. And I believe we now have a video.
Yes, hopefully. I'm just going to stop sharing briefly and make sure that I was sharing with audio. Bear with me. Includes sound. There we go. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see this. I'm sure somebody will tell me if you can't.
An electrician began checking the electrics at Miss R's property. Miss R challenged him when he went upstairs where her children were sleeping. She did not expect him to need to go upstairs. An argument followed and the electrician left. The landlord had explained the scope of the work to Miss R by telephone the week before, but did not repeat the information on the day of the visit. The landlord acknowledged and apologized for the distress caused. It said it would work to improve its procedure accordingly. We found the landlord's response was reasonable. There was no specific failing by the landlord or its contractor, but it recognized there was room for improvement. This case shows the importance of making sure that residents are aware what will happen and when. Consider providing a reminder to the resident in advance and check whether they have any concerns before work begins. An electrician.
Oh.
Bonus.
It has definitely finished now, hasn't it? Before I start.
Yes, it has.
Yes, great. Thank you. So further about building those relationships and understanding. One of the earliest emerging themes from the roundtable events and strongly reflected in our casework was the lack of or perceived lack of relationship management. And we had a lot of feedback around this in terms of there's a sense that relationship management itself can be overlooked in favour of contract and performance management. So more about those formal key performance indicators and so forth. And contractors and landlords spoke about the desire for more in-person meetings, more informal performance conversations, and sharing of positive as well as constructive feedback. And contractors spoke to us about what they said was the race to secure the contract itself, and then they feel that there's a shift towards little or no communication afterwards. And we could see in our casework that the lack of regular communication can lead to things like avoidable delays, issues with work quality, misunderstandings, and multiple appointments, which may not have been necessary. And some of the feedback we received included contractors saying they didn't get the assistance that they need until compliance is coming to an end. And then they've said, reported to us about feeling under massive pressure at that point. And we saw a really positive example of this in practice with a landlord that we met with. And it really highlights the difference a relationship management approach can make. So briefly, the landlord faced issues with its repairs contractor, and this wasn't due to the work quality itself, but actually to do with poor customer care. Residents were reporting to the landlord that they didn't like the contractor's approach and tone. And so as a result, the landlord told the contractor that it was going to terminate the contract. The contractor requested feedback and asked the landlord for a chance to improve. And the landlord reflected and realised it hadn't shared its concerns with the contractor before putting it on notice of termination. So the landlord reflected and agreed to pause the contract, allowing the contractor to make those necessary changes. The contractor subsequently improved significantly and is now one of the landlord's top performers. And the landlord told us that it learned the importance of that open dialogue, that constructive feedback, and the balance between the negative and positive remarks. And they emphasised the need for the landlord to be approachable and receptive to discussions beyond just those key performance indicators or costs, and ensuring that contractors receive praise for their good performance as well. And I'm now going to hand back to Chris, who's going to speak some more about the building those relationships and behaviours.
Yeah, so again, I think unsurprisingly, one of the things that landlords and contractors talk to us about at length is the behaviour that's sometimes displayed by residents, unreasonable or unacceptable behaviour. We think about, we see this a lot in our casework, and we think about it quite a lot too. The trust that needs to exist between landlords and the contractors and the operatives and the tenant is absolutely vital. And any a breakdown in that trust can lead to devastating consequences, as we've seen in the not too recent past. Not the, I don't know what that phrase is. Anyway, those behaviours are key to building this trust. So most repairs, we think, go off without a hitch, although we don't hear about those ones too often here at the Housing Ombudsman. But there are cases where a resident's behaviour becomes or verges on the unacceptable. But the key to dealing with that, I think, lies in understanding the root cause and we're actively working to prevent these situations from arising in the first place, wherever possible. So the first one is the state of the home. We've touched on the sort of the emotive aspect of disrepair already, but when someone's home is in bad nick, it can really affect how a resident might feel. Leaks, damp and mold particularly make people embarrassed or ashamed of their living situation. They might not want visitors coming round to see that. And obviously, if the problem has been going on for quite some time, that can cause enormous frustration. A resident's sort of pre-existing expectations of the service that their landlord is able to provide is really also key. You want to do everything you can to manage those expectations, really. Resident expectations, I think, have probably, from what we were hearing from residents and from organisations like TPAS and so on, were telling us that the expectations or the aspirations, if you like, have risen quite dramatically over the last sort of 5 years or so. So if a landlord isn't clear about service standards that residents can expect, residents might expect a faster service or a higher quality service than is actually possible within what the landlord can afford to deliver. So there's some things there. The managing the expectations is really important. What you don't always know going in is the resident's past experience of the landlord, and that can be recent, or that can be sort of much more entrenched. But it plays a significant role in visits, I think. If someone has bad experience with repairs or maintenance in the past, or an ongoing complaint or multiple complaints, they might already feel sort of uneasy or on edge or ready for an argument, perhaps. So where if those relationships are broken down or are breaking down, addressing that is just as important in some cases as addressing the repair. It can get that barrier out of the way. And then some of the other frustrations, avoidable delays, poor communication, we've spoken about already, missed appointments, obviously erodes some trust and some patience there. And the delays is the thing. Things get worse the longer they're left, I suppose. Moving on to the other side of it, so just as a resident might be a bit sort of nervous or emotive about letting someone into their home, whoever it is on the other side of the front door might also feel uneasy or on edge, and there's loads of reasons for that, but a lot of things have to go right very quickly when you knock on that door to make sure that the visit's successful. From what we see in our casework and what we were told by landlords and contractors during field work and such, was that the heart of the problem here is information sharing, is inadequate information. So a visit can fail because the contractor or the operative doesn't have enough information about the repair itself or the previous attempt that might have been made to complete that repair. That can go, equally for if certain repairs have to happen in the right order and they haven't, that sort of thing. Not having information about the resident or their specific needs. If there are any reasonable adjustments that need to be made and you don't know about it, that can be very awkward. There might be all sorts of other things to know about the existing relationship with the landlord, what they're walking into there. And not always having the right information about any risk to their health and safety that might be presented by either the property or the resident even. So having that information, the contractors, operatives, they need all that relevant information in order to provide the service that everybody wants to provide, timely and quality service. So, while residents misbehave sometimes so do landlord staff, operatives, contractors. So when a resident complains about an operative's conduct, it's crucial to maintaining trust that the landlord take ownership of that and investigate. Too often we see in our casework a complaint about a member of contractor staff is just sent over to the contractor itself, and that's the response to the resident. We've referred it to the contractor. That's not good enough, really. It doesn't do anything to repair the relationship there. So that's key. We recommend having a code of conduct. Now, from the call for evidence slide, we found 3 in 5 landlords, I think, had or told us that they had a code of conduct for operatives. We found, I think, they're sort of often buried in contracts rather than sort of published or made available for residents. It's not always necessary that the resident has it, but it's important that complaint handlers have something to hang their decisions on, and those can be a really useful framework for upholding those standards. And the sort of values and behaviours of the organisation, the things that you want to see. Remember that your contractor, your operatives, they are the landlord's face to residents. So they've got to be sort of representative of your organisation's values. So yeah, that can be embedded, I suppose, in codes of conduct. All right, Zoe.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And so picking up where you left off about those individual circumstances and reasonable adjustments and so forth, 45% of residents in our call for evidence survey told us that they're living with conditions that affect their daily lives, which really highlights how this is a key consideration when delivering those repairs and maintenance services. And it's vital that contractors are given the information about resident circumstances. And there's a quote there saying you could knock on the door and not know who lives there. We were also told we're lucky if we get a contact number, let alone anything else. So that just gives you a flavour of some of the feedback that we received. And a bit about the information sharing as well. So what was promising was 84% of contractors told us that they're generally comfortable reporting safeguarding concerns. They also said that they often don't receive any feedback, which leaves them or can leave them feeling unsure of what is expected of them. So in our recommendations, we talk about the need for those clear reporting processes and appropriate information sharing. And a bit more about those individual circumstances. So as part of our research, we looked at the Disability Support and Social Housing Resident Panel report. And that report emphasises the need for better awareness and training for social housing contractors regarding disability in particular. And residents in that particular report, spoke about issues such as building materials being left as hazards and incorrect home adaptations due to contractors not listening or not understanding what their needs are. And then moving on to procurement, so as touched on earlier, we also spoke with some procurement agencies as part of our collaboration and research. And we speak about procurement as fundamentally an exercise in trust. And that came across really strongly in the conversations. We were told, if you get it right from the start and everything else follows, which may seem obvious, but we saw lots of examples of where it isn't right from the start. And one of the main issues, or appears to be one of the main issues about what goes wrong, is an issue about false promises made on either side. And contractors may be feeling under pressure to accept work that they know they can't deliver, which is a situation that doesn't benefit anybody. We also look into resident involvement in procurement. And in January 2021, TPAS and Fusion 21 published research highlighting the benefits of resident involvement in contract procurement. So we have a link to that in the report, which would be an interesting and useful read. We've touched on it previously as well, but knowledge and information management. And we describe Kim as an enabler in this report, so an enabler to building those empathetic relationships and understanding. We did see some positive examples, so data sharing agreements, risk assessments, shared digital platforms. They were quite few and far between, those examples, but we did see signs that that's beginning to happen. Some landlords were doing repeat repairs analysis and really having that scrutiny around repairs being raised and associated audit trails. But equally, we saw repeated issues such as poor Kim around hazard management and stock condition. And we do set out some good examples, some positive examples that we saw in action around knowledge and information management. So do advise that you look at that section of the report to read those examples. So moving on to operational excellence and accountability. We stress the point that contracts are more than just paperwork and they should be actively monitored and managed. And it's really important that contracts state what is expected and what happens if those expectations aren't met. And we saw throughout our casework that poor management of contractors and that failure to monitor works can erode the trust between the resident, the contractor, and the landlord. Additionally, inadequate information sharing can severely reduce a landlord's chances at meeting residents' needs. And with the advent of the Procurement Act, there's going to be that increased focus on how well contractors perform, which means there's an even greater need for that effective contract and relationship management. And without that, there is a risk that performance reports might not accurately show the genuine issues, making them seem unfairly critical instead of aiming to improve standards. And Chris is now going to play us another video.
Miss O reported concerns about the condition of her kitchen, which had been fitted by the previous tenant. The landlord inspected the kitchen and confirmed a full kitchen replacement was required and that it would be completed in approximately 4 months. However, it did not order the work. 5 months later, Miss O complained that her kitchen had not yet been replaced. The landlord apologized, ordered the work and sent its contractor to take measurements. After a further delay caused by the manufacturer, work started, but the contractor left without completing work and did not tell Miss O when it would return. Miss O complained about the condition her property had been left in, so the landlord sent its in-house team to complete the work. Miss O remained dissatisfied with the quality of the work. The landlord agreed and sent another contractor to put things right. This contractor not only failed to remedy the problems, but also inadvertently shut Miss O's cat inside, causing it distress, entered the property and Miss O's bedroom while she slept, wore muddy boots indoors, and damaged her furniture. The landlord acknowledged and apologized for most of this, but did not accept Miss O's claim for damaged furniture, saying there was no evidence that the contractor had caused it. In this case, the landlord failed to appropriately manage the quality of works carried out by both outsourced and in-house teams. Regular contractor performance monitoring may have prevented some of the problems with quality. The landlord also failed to fairly investigate Miss O's claims of damage to belongings. The lack of a fair approach often causes animosity, suspicion, and delay in resolving the issue, the antithesis of a trusting relationship. We found maladministration and ordered the landlord to pay Miss O £2,650 in compensation.
Thank you. So back to that operational excellence and accountability. We often saw that landlords responded to residents' repairs and maintenance complaints by saying that they were in the process of or had recently changed contractors. And this is something that we've also seen in some of our special investigations as well that we've highlighted in those. And one of the problems with this particular approach is that it suggests there's a belief that the explanation of action taken is sufficient and that no further actions are required. But what we would really expect to see is that landlords consider their infrastructure, such as their procurement processes, their service level agreements, information sharing practices or systems, as also part of that lessons learned and things that need to be put in place when changing contractors. So it shouldn't just see changing contracts or terminating contracts as the panacea in isolation. A bit more about operational excellence and accountability. Planning, it came up, featured quite heavily throughout our investigation, and lots of examples of where there was a lack of schedule of works. So we cite an example of where a resident was given 2 days notice of major works which are scheduled to last for 10 days. And throughout our fieldwork, contractors told us about the need for really effective planning, particularly around travel times. And the quality control processes, so Chris mentioned it in the call for evidence, and we've just heard a bit about it in the Miss O video, but it was a really strong theme throughout around a lack of a clear quality control process. So 33% of residents perceive a lack of quality assurance activities being carried out by the landlord during and after works. And 40% believe social housing landlords carry out a poor standard of work. So we saw lots of examples of the impact of these lack of quality control processes. So some of these included putting new flooring over damp without removing it first, therefore causing more damage during that process. We also saw examples of contractors attempting to carry out work they're not skilled or qualified in, which understandably resulting in dissatisfaction with the quality of the repair and ultimately resulting in complaints. And damage to belongings itself was a really strong theme, and an issue where the landlord was not able to verify what condition the property or belongings were in at the start of that process. And we saw different approaches taken in this area, and they range from agreeing with the contractor, landlords agreeing with the contractor. If the contractor says we didn't do it, the landlord taking that side despite evidence to the contrary, or conversely agreeing with the resident and offering compensation without any evidence. So moving on to safety, risk and complaint management, we've touched a bit on the safeguardings aspect. We looked at the Make Every Visit Count report as part of our research, and we speak about the need to create a virtuous cycle where operatives feel that they trust the process. Ultimately, they trust that their feedback will be valued and acted upon, which would then hopefully make them feel confident about raising any future concerns. And we have an example of this done well in practice in the report. So this example involves Ms. D and her child, and they moved to supported housing after escaping domestic abuse. And on arrival, Ms D reported leaks, mould and cleanliness issues and expressed concerns about discrimination. And the landlord in this instance promptly inspected, they documented and repaired the issues and offered a free clean. And they also appropriately addressed her discrimination concerns thoroughly. And it was during these repairs that a contractor noticed the absence of furniture and toys, and they informed the landlord, and the landlord arranged for these items. And what was really key about this example was the communication between the landlord and the contractor demonstrated empathy and trust, which had the positive outcome of ensuring that Ms D and her child received necessary support. And over to you, Chris.
Another video. Yeah.
Mrs. A lives with her children and had problems with heating and hot water for several years, including at least a dozen reports of complete heating failure. She complained to the landlord that the problems continued despite over 20 visits to her home. The landlord's contractor had recommended replacing the system at the property on several occasions, and Mrs. A asked the landlord to act accordingly. In its complaint responses, the landlord repeatedly refused to replace the heating and hot water system. It said that a senior engineer had attended and found no faults. This was despite its contractors recommending a replacement no fewer than 8 times, noting that the property was several degrees lower than it ought to be and pointing out that the residents were vulnerable to the cold. We found maladministration and ordered the landlord to carry out repairs to Mrs. A's heating system in line with its contractor's notes, apologise to Mrs. A and provide compensation of £3,525, review its handling of the repairs, record keeping and complaint. In this case, the contractors repeatedly tried to take the correct action. However, the landlord did not respond, leaving Mrs. A and her family with inadequate or no heating and hot water for over 2 years.
Thank you. Moving on to safety, risk and complaint management, we met with various landlords, as we said, during the field work, and they shared with us how they're preparing for our Webb's Law. So some examples of those included IT system improvements, training and collaborations with service providers. And landlords outsourcing repairs are working closely with contractors, making our Webb's Law a regular topic in meetings to ensure readiness. But we do flag in the report that the prioritisation of damp and mould, there's a risk that it might lead to the neglect of other areas. So we talk about the importance of a need for a hazard prevention approach. We then go on to talk about risk in terms of the risk that's in the property, risk to the contractor and risk to the residents. And we talk about 3 components to risk management, being that risk present in the property, so that the contractor and the landlord both need to be aware of, any potential risk to the contractors, which the resident or the resident situation may cause, and safety risk to residents. And landlords told us about some of the steps that they're taking to make improvements in this area. So some examples included ensuring that risks are kept up to date with any markers on systems being reflective of the current situation. One landlord gave us an example of not reviewing a marker that said the visit required 2 people, and that caused problems to the contractors when they attended, as the resident felt the approach was heavy-handed and unfair. So that shows the importance of reviewing those markers. Another example given was ensuring processes are in place for situations such as contractors attending a visit and it not being safe for them to attend, such as if the resident is under the influence. But landlords we met with recognise the importance of not just recording risks and sharing appropriately, but also setting out what any associated risk mitigation measures are. And as I said, it was really important to us that we focus on examples of good practice. So in the report, we look at current challenges that landlords face, such as recruitment, and skill shortages, and how they can be barriers to both timeliness and quality. So we met with Live West and spoke to them about their Women in Construction programme, and Procure Plus, who have an ex-offender scheme. And we also speak about the Women in Trades project, which offers taster days through a local college, trialling flexible working, having mentors. So lots of examples there about what some landlords and what some agencies are doing to address the challenges. And then in terms of complaint handling, it became apparent to us during the investigation that some landlords and contractors are still suffering the effects of the backlogs from the pandemic. They also highlighted with us a mixed understanding of an interpretation of the complaint handling code. And there was also fear, I think it's safe to say, around contractors about fear about doing something or not doing something that may result in a complaint. Some contractors told us they've had to create their own complaints team, and they've said that again linked is to the code. So they feel that some landlords are now treating all matters, including service requests, as a complaint, which has had a knock-on effect on those complaint volumes. And contractors spoke to us about needing a balance between acknowledging what might be contributing to repairs and maintenance issues and assuming the solution is always a repair or a maintenance job, because they said that in their view they were sometimes asked to replace vents, for example, knowing that that wasn't the solution, because the solution was more based on something within the resident's home, but again there was that reluctance to raise it for fear of generating a complaint. And we also speak about analysis of complaints at an early stage and highlighting and using it as an indicator of where trust might beginning to break down, and really take those proactive steps at an earlier stage to reverse any worrying signs. And also that structured learning from complaints, which could help landlords have more of a preventative maintenance model, because it provides that important intelligence on people, processes, systems, and overall service delivery. So in terms of recommendations, not going to list them all here, but I want to say that we do recognise the operating challenges that we've mentioned and the climate, and as a result of that we increasingly make recommendations for government and policy makers, so not just at landlord level. And all our recommendations are designed to highlight key actions that can be taken to enhance trust and collaboration in this instance repairs and maintenance. And we encourage all landlords, regardless of current practices, to carefully review the recommendations and identify and adopt those that best fit their specific context and needs. So we recognise that not all recommendations may be applicable, and that's absolutely fine. It's really just providing you an opportunity to pause and reflect upon your practice and look at if there's anything in the recommendations that you think would be worthwhile and you could adopt. And we also encourage that the approach is discussed with the member responsible for complaints and wider governance. And just a few of the examples there. So linked with what we've said, so the code of conduct that Chris has mentioned, we've got the resident involvement at procurement stage, carrying out learning exercises post-contract termination, and the implementation or a review of quality assurance processes, including a damage compensation procedure. And before the questions, we're just going to end with a roundup of the response we've had so far to repairing trust.
Social tenants have very little choice over who their landlord is, and they have very little say over the services they receive, however poor they are. And that inherent imbalance of power, I think, has led to a growing sense of frustration. They are met with communication sometimes by landlords that's indifferent. Sometimes the communication lacks dignity and respect, and they will feel stigmatized. Work of ITV News has had a significant impact on residents and their confidence to raise issues. Tenants simply won't be fobbed off now, whereas in the past there was a kind of attitude of get back in your box almost. You should be grateful for the accommodation that you have.
Is this government, in your opinion, taking decisive action to make this better for people to live in safe, secure homes?
Well, we talk about the decent home standard. I'd ask the government, where is it? Because as of yet, we're no clearer on what changes they're going to make in regards to that compared to the current standard we have now.
The sense of inadequate communication is really strongly felt, and that's more than a transactional thing. It's something about the tone of communication, it's something about empathy, it's about respect, and it can be about stigma.
ITV News has been covering the squalid, dangerous conditions in some social housing for 4 years. Today we've discovered that the Ombudsman has received 500% more complaints now than they did 4 years ago. What is your message to social landlords who are not dealing with these conditions?
Let me deal with the second bit first, because it is really important that we're clear. Anyway, but in light of this particular report, that everybody has the right to a safe place to live, and that is absolutely central to our work on housing and the work the Deputy Prime Minister is doing. It's why, for example, she's introducing a new law to ensure that standards are the right standards for people to live in, and so that's at the heart of everything that we do.
Right, thank you, Zoe and Chris. That was really, really great. We've just got one question in the chat. Feel free to add your questions to the chat. We've only got 6 minutes for questions now, so I'll put an email address in the chat as well in case you want to send Zoe and Chris a question afterwards. The question that has been asked, it was during your section, Chris, around the call for evidence. It's from Joanne, and she said, could you provide some information on the methodology used and the numbers involved with the survey research, please? Is this within the report?
I believe the methodology is siphoned away at the end of the report as an appendix rather than up front where we normally put it. But yes, we designed the survey. So in our team, we have a couple of I think I can describe them as data scientists, can't I? So they're very, very clever officers who helped design the survey for us. So that was sent out. The communications team will have a better idea of how that got plugged, but it went out in newsletters on the website, elsewhere. So that was for residents. Elected reps, there's freely available government databases with all those email addresses. So our policy and parliamentary officer got in touch with everybody there with survey questions for them. The other surveys, again, through online, through newsletters and such, I actually went and for the first time sort of plugged the call for evidence survey myself at a couple of meetings with places like the Confederation of Cooperative Housing and some other events. I can't remember, it's all a bit of a blur now. So we did really hustle to try and get as much of a response as we could. I hope that answers the question, but if it doesn't, we will pop our Victoria said we'll pop our email in the chat. You can ask us anything you like, really. I'll put it up on the screen now.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll pop that in the chat as well, so you can just copy and paste that as well. A really good question from Laura, actually. In the past, there have been some self-assessment templates that landlords can self-assess themselves against the recommendations. Is there one for this report?
There isn't. I don't think we've done that since the noise report. The reason being that when we do the follow-up reports and evaluations, we've found that we get the self-assessment given to us in a range of different formats, and so we didn't want to be seen to be saying this is the only way that you can do a self-assessment. If there's an appetite for it, we can absolutely put that back in place, but we stopped doing it just because of all the different ways that we saw that landlords were self-assessing, and we didn't want to be in any way being seen to say that there is only one way to self-assess.
Thank you, Zoe. Anna's asked if anybody can share examples of resident validated right first time contractor KPIs. That would be much appreciated. So I don't know if anybody has got those examples, could you send them to the mailbox that I've just popped into the chat, and then we can collate them and I'll send it out with a copy of the recording so everybody that's on the call. So if you have got those, if you could email them in, that would be great, and we can share those. The next question, I'm just going to try and sneak this one in. Claire asks, is there a concern that a compensation culture is developing with the recommendation for the damage compensation procedure? Will any further guidance be provided by the Housing Ombudsman Service?
So yes, so we do have a remedies guidance available at the moment, which I believe is being updated. In terms of this particular point around quality assurance, I actually think it's probably more the opposite, because what we've seen is that some landlords are paying compensation when perhaps they don't need to. So we're saying, rather than we're saying both those approaches are wrong, sort of just siding with a contractor and saying no, we don't, we're not going to pay, is also ineffective in the same way that saying, okay, here's £300, for example, without being assured that any damage has been caused. So we're saying the fairest approach and most efficient approach for all is to have those procedures in place and the evidence so that you can defend the position. If you're saying, actually, no, we don't think this situation warrants any compensation, it's about being able to have the evidence to support that position.
I'm going to come in to support that point. And there is, we are not saying pay more compensation for damage. We're saying have a procedure, follow it, keep records, make your decisions based on evidence. Don't pay. It's the same as my view on apologies. Don't apologise unless you've got something to apologise for. Don't pay compensation unless you've got something to compensate for. You've got to be really, really stringent on that. I think there is if not a culture, a perception. Certainly from the field work we carried out, talking to operatives and contractors, there is a sort of a small cluster of those staff who do perceive a complaints and compensation culture in the organisations that they're working for, they're contracted to. I don't think in those cases, I actually don't agree. I don't think there is, or there certainly didn't seem to be any evidence of it. So there's something there about the sort of the values of the organisation, and having those procedures and showing them to staff and saying, here's how we make these decisions. We get ahead of that, and because I think that a compensation culture that runs the risk of stigmatising residents and as cash grabbers, and I really don't think that helps anybody. So we strongly recommend having a really robust procedure for that.
Thank you both. Thank you for all of your questions and for attending the session today. I put a link into an evaluation form into the chat. It'd be great if you could give us your feedback. We want to make these as useful for you guys as possible, so we'll review all of that feedback afterwards. The questions that I've asked that we've not been able to take away, I'll get answers for you, and once the recording's ready and it's live, I'll send you all an email confirming how to access that and the answers to the questions as well. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and thank you very much, Chris and Zoe.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.